The NFL is more unpredictable than ever. Injuries keep happening to star players, and you never know what could happen on a weekly basis. That means in fantasy football, you have to be active, and that includes the waiver wire. So let's talk about the key injuries from last week and who you should be picking up or streaming to help you continue to win. No matter how you do in your fantasy football league, remember, you can always get into the action with Underdog. If you haven't tried it yet, it is not too late. If you are new to Underdog, Matt Stafford on Thursday night, just getting 1 yard. Just make sure you sign up and use promo code ENDGAME. You get that free pick. You get your 100% deposit match, still up to $100. And you can also start getting in on some of these best ball drafts. The weekly drafts and playoff drafts are here. Every sport is available for both pick'ems and drafts, but you got to sign up to find out. So just click on the link down below in the description or just download the app. Just make sure you use promo code ENDGAME when you sign up. Here are the new injuries from Week 15. It's still a lot of players to talk about. On Saturday, we saw Jamar Chase leave early with a shoulder injury. He's been called day-to-day, which is a good thing, better than week-to-week or missing long-term. Keep an eye on his practice reports closely, and Cincinnati plays on Saturday again this week. In his absence, what we saw is T. Higgins showed up and finally had a big game this year, and he had it with Jake Browning. You would think that he would be more involved again. Tyler Boyd is still there. I actually like tight end Tanner Hudson as well too. But for those of you who do have Chase, again, there is a chance he does play in Week 16. Another stud receiver who got injured on Saturday was Michael Pittman. You saw it was a brutal hit. Obviously, he's in the concussion protocol, was having another productive day. If he's cleared and he plays, you're still going to want to play him for sure. That's why we always say to check in with us on our live streams so we can give you the latest information and advice. Indianapolis also saw another injury, and that was to running back Zach Moss, who's been the starter the last couple of weeks. Trey Sermon filled in for him and actually did a pretty decent job. Now, the real hope with Moss and this injury is that it doesn't even matter because Jonathan Taylor could be back next week. Everyone who has JT hopes that that's the case. And honestly, the way Zach Moss has been playing, you kind of almost hope that you don't have to consider starting him lately anyways. Another very frustrating one here is Marquise Brown. Hollywood, again, left early the second time in the last couple of weeks, exiting with that heel issue, just has not gone away. Just when you think he's back, he isn't, and it's at this point, just don't want any part of this because it's so hard to see this going away. Good news for the Card is that Michael Wilson, the rookie, did come back, so he might play a larger role this coming week if Hollywood is completely out. In Green Bay, all sorts of banged up along that receiver room. Jaden Reed, also this toe issue that has been kind of coming and going. He played, he scored a touchdown, had actually a pretty good game, 6 catches, 52 yards in that score, but then he left and did not come back. Dontavian Wicks, the other rookie, who he thought he was going to miss with his own injury, he played, and he actually led the team in receiving. So it follows logically that next week, if Reed does miss, Wicks could be the beneficiary. But of course, we don't know if Christian Watson will play, so who knows. And then this week, we only saw 2 quarterbacks get hurt. Feels low. Toward the end of the game, Tennessee, not with a comeback victory. In fact, it was the opposite this week. They kind of choked away lead and lost to the Texans. But more importantly, Will Levis, their starting quarterback, he suffered a lower leg injury. Looked like they were examining the ankle. But again, it's hard to say. Don't know if this is going to be serious. It's a good chance Levis is out, which means the return of Ryan Tannehill. And that means nothing good, really, for this passing offense. And then for the Jets, Zach Wilson didn't get a chance to repeat his performance from last week because he left early with a head injury, was replaced by Trevor Siemian. And I know the question that follows, it is, are we going to see Aaron Rodgers? This isn't the time to get into all that, but it's worth noting that the Jets, besides just losing soundly in Week 15, were also mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. So is there really a need for Aaron Rodgers to play other than just showing up and saying, here I am? Best advice right now is still just kind of avoid the Jets offense throughout the playoffs if you can afford to. And then on Sunday night, we saw a couple of injuries to key players. First of all, Keaton Mitchell carted off the field, never a good sight. Initial report looks like a hyperextended knee. Still way too early to really speculate, but clearly not a good sign. It means we're going to see more of Gus the Bus going forward, maybe the rest of the season. And then Zay Jones, who's just had a hard time staying healthy at all this year, pulled up what appeared to be a hamstring injury. Man, the guy's already been struggling, wearing a brace. His knee has been giving him issues, so hard to imagine whether he'll be good to go week 16. Calvin Ridley is going to have to show up at some point, but it'll probably just be more Evan Ingram. And then finally at tight end, Hunter Henry, after coming off a nice game again with Bailey Zappi at quarterback, he left with a knee injury, got banged up early in that game, continued to fight through it, but has been in some discomfort, so his status will be up in the air next week, which is really unfortunate because he could be in a smash spot. And that leads me to my first waiver wire recommendation for week 16. It's Hunter Henry. I know for a fact a lot of the teams still competing in the playoffs here, on the way to maybe winning it all in fantasy, are streaming tight ends or still just picking up the pieces after losing guys like Mark Andrews and you having to play the waiver wire. And that's fine because there are not that many stud tight ends out there. If you happen to play Hunter Henry this week or last week, you're happy with it. Should you keep it going? If he plays, absolutely. As I just mentioned, he's coming off a 7-catch, 66-yard performance with a touchdown against the Chiefs. Remember back in week 14, he scored 2 touchdowns, which means 3 in the 2 starts with Bailey Zappi at quarterback. That can't just be a coincidence. It's also because they need him. Let's face it, this Patriots wide receiver room is not super deep in talent. Henry has always been a good red zone threat. And this is the perfect time to roll him out, assuming he's good to go, because it's the Broncos next week. And yes, the Broncos are still one of the worst defenses against the tight end. Now, as I say, you want to stream Henry. Again, you're just going to have to keep an eye and see if this knee injury is going to be an issue. You got to wonder if Henry is out, does this make Mike Gesicki viable in fantasy? I'm not going to go there. I'll say I think it would just make me like Demario Douglas a little bit better, though he's a receiver. But there is another tight end that I like too. I'll talk about him last, so keep it tuned here if you still need another tight end to stream. A lot of you are also still mixing and matching at quarterback. You need a guy for week 16. Let's start with a guy who is the number 1 passer in terms of yardage and one of the very top fantasy quarterbacks for this past week. It's Baker Mayfield. After basically a month of mediocrity, Baker Mayfield looked like he was tapering off and reverting back to his former self. All of a sudden, he has his best game of the season. Mayfield threw for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Packers, and this was on the road in Lambeau Field. He was so impressive, he's got Packers fans calling for the head of the defensive coordinator after this game, although I think they were already kind of starting to go there. Now, I don't always assume that the guy who was one of the top players from last week is going to be the top player next week. It doesn't work that way necessarily, but you've got to love the matchup this coming week. It's going to be a battle of the Sunshine State between the lesser Florida teams. Tampa Bay against Jacksonville, and the Jags defense, yeah, they forced a lot of turnovers, but they're also bottom 3 in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks entering this week. Chris Godwin finally got involved again, not just that they actually threw it to him a lot, but he did something with it, so it wasn't just the Mike Evans show. Rachaad White has been lights out. This offense is clicking again, and so in this matchup, gotta like Mayfield. If he's out there, he's going to be my top streaming recommendation. If Mayfield isn't available or you just want to go in a different direction, I get it. Let's try another veteran, and I mean veteran. The original Joe Cool is Joe Flacco. Huge props to Flacco and Coach Kevin Stefanski for what they've done this last couple of weeks. Despite all those injuries in the offensive line and despite everything that's going on with the quarterback changes there in Cleveland, they've won the last couple of games. They're looking like a playoff team, and Joe Flacco has gotten better every week as the starter, and he deserves to be the starter going forward. 7 touchdowns passing over the last 3 games, and his yardage continues to go up to 374 yards just this last week alone. In this game against the Bears defense, that has been a lot better over the past month, especially since they added Montez Sweat. And so, sure, they turned him over 3 times. Flacco will still throw the interception once in a while. Got 3 of them in this game. But again, you look at this Bears defense. I keep saying this because it's really gone underreported. I think people don't realize how much better they've been. The Bears have a total of 12 interceptions just over the last 4 games. I'm looking more at the yards and the touchdowns than the INTs for Flacco. It's not as tough a matchup next week going against the Texans defense, which is solid, but not lights out. Just the volume alone in which he's passing at, Flacco's going to get you yardage. It looks like he's going to get you a couple of touchdowns at least. Much safer bet than most quarterbacks out there. And so while there's still some other guys I like, Jordan Love is fine. Jake Browning seems pretty solid. I liked those guys a lot last week. This coming week, I'm going to say Mayfield and then Flacco. Now let's talk about those Texans who get to play Cleveland next week. Tough defensive assignment for sure, but we've got to take a really hard look now if Noah Brown is on your waiver wire still, and apparently he is in more than half of all fantasy leagues. Hard to imagine why. Sure, we know CJ Stroud was going to be out week 15, but Nico Collins was also out, so what happened? Of course, Noah Brown was the number one receiver for Houston. Keenum at least got him the ball, Case Keenum I mean, and he came away with another big game. 8 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown, and he was targeted 11 times. Considering the Texans only threw it 36 times, that's a huge target share. Now, Nico Collins could come back next week. Yes, that will affect Noah Brown, but CJ Stroud could also come back next week. In fact, I feel pretty good about the fact Stroud will be back. And so you've got to like Brown just because he has been a big play machine. I've talked about this a lot. In fact, I feel like this is the 3rd or 4th time I've mentioned Brown. One of the league leaders in yards per reception, over 11 yards per target. That's the kind of upside that you want. And there is no guarantee Nico Collins comes back next week. If Brown is out there, go grab him now. And I'll say an even more high priority pickup, if he happens to be available, is going to be the running back Devin Singletary. After Dameon Pierce came back from his injury, he all of a sudden took over lead role duties again, out-touching Singletary. It seemed like it was going to be at the very least a timeshare, or that Pierce was going to be the starter again. That didn't really make sense at the time because Singletary had been so good the previous few weeks and Pierce had just been bad all season. Then we saw it start to shift back again, and now it's as if Pierce isn't even there. Only carried the ball once in week 15. Meanwhile, Singletary, another huge game. He wound up with 26 carries for 121 yards and 4 catches for 49 yards. And this should have been even bigger because he had that walk-off touchdown. Would have been a game winner in overtime, but was called back because of a holding penalty. When you see what Singletary has done both before and after that Week 13 game, it just makes it even more confusing why Pierce was ever used as the lead rusher. I think that's done now. Singletary, he's got to be the guy going forward. Again, this offense will be better with Stroud back. And again, although this matchup isn't great against the Cleveland defense, it still doesn't seem to matter. At least Texans are at home. Their offense does much better when they're in Houston. And Singletary's performed against some really tough defenses as well. He's only out there in about a quarter of fantasy leagues, but you never know where he might have been dropped. So go out and check. Better chance that a guy like Ty Chandler is available, and he's coming off a big game as well. Now we knew Alexander Madison wasn't going to play because of injury. Not sure whether he'll play next week, but either way, let's give Chandler a look. He's coming off a game where he went for 157 total yards and a touchdown. He's been good when given the chance. He just needed this injury to happen to become the guy. A word of warning before we get too far into the Ty Chandler hype is, first of all, Madison could play next week. We'll have to see. But also, he has to face the Detroit Lions on the road. But Chandler's still worth picking up because if Madison's out, he's going to be a workhorse, getting touches both as a rusher and also as a receiver. We know there's touchdown upside. This offense seemed to click with Mullins as opposed to Josh Dobbs. And if the Lions play like they did this past week on offense and actually look more like the Lions of old, maybe it forces the Vikings to keep up. Get a little deeper, another possibility running back, Zamir White. Now, kind of like I just said with Chandler, this really depends on what happens to the lead back here, which is Josh Jacobs. We know he didn't play week 15. It's too early to say whether Jacobs has a chance to play this coming week or not. If Jacobs is playing, he's active, then all bets are off here. White is basically unusable. We know Antonio Pierce loves him some Josh Jacobs, and he said it'll be all him basically if he's active. But if Jacobs is out, he's going to be the lead back. I've always liked Zeus as a prospect, thought he could do some things given the chance. Just never had the chance because Jacobs has been so good the last couple of years. He finally got a shot. What I was worried about was whether he would even get enough of the market share of this running back room because We've seen guys like Amir Abdullah get involved, even Brandon Bolden. You saw all those guys came in and even scored touchdowns. But Zamir was clearly the lead back here. 17 carries, wound up with 69 yards and a touchdown. And he was on the field by far the most. Those guys got involved early, but then after that, it was pretty much all White. Right now, I'll say if you're a Jacobs owner, you should already have White. And if you don't, do it now. You're looking for an RB stash with some upside, grab White and see if Jacobs is out again. And we don't want to take too much away from that Thursday night game, which just wound up being absurd. Wound up being the last game for Chargers head coach Brandon Staley. So while it's easy to dismiss Josh Palmer because, he went over 100 yards and a touchdown, but it was pretty much all on that one long play that just kind of fluky touchdown in garbage time. Normally, I wouldn't recommend picking a player just because he had a long touchdown. But in this case, got to look at Palmer because Keenan Allen, remember he missed. Is he coming back? Who knows at this point? We could see Josh Palmer, again, serve as the number one receiver and target in this offense. And if you haven't been paying attention to Chargers football, the run game is non-existent and the defense is still terrible. That means no matter whoever's out there, they're going to have to pass the ball a lot to even try to keep up. So you've got to think that Palmer's going to get a decent target share. We know he has big playability. He had that even just before this 79-yard score. There's risk here for sure, but there's also some upside. And next week, going against the Buffalo Bills, I have a feeling Chargers might have to pass it a lot. And then finally, I want to talk about another tight end because my first pick here, Hunter Henry, there's a chance he doesn't even play. So if you still are in the market for a TE, let's go back to a guy I mentioned at the very top, and that's Tanner Hudson. Hudson's been kind of a sneaky streamer on occasion, coming basically out of nowhere. Not some exciting young rookie. He's a guy who's been in the league a couple of years and just hasn't done anything. But for some reason this year, he's getting the chance to be the starter at tight end. And this Bengals offense not only is rolling a little bit again with Jake Browning, but also remember Jamar Chase is injured. I like him this week in particular because even though it didn't do a whole lot, in week 15, Hudson's going to go against the Steelers, and Steelers are still a great defense to stream tight end against because of those injuries at linebacker. So he didn't do a whole lot the last time these two teams met, but things were different back then. So depending on your league, look, if like Isaiah Likely's out there in waiver, sure, pick him up. If Hunter Henry's there and he's going to play, I'd take him. If neither of those are the case, I'll just go with Hudson. Stick with us until the season is over. Going to keep helping you try to win, take home that championship in fantasy. Right here, right now, week 16, we got your playlist with all the start sit advice and everything that you need to win.